I'm Ruth Jones. I'm a member of the Portland African Violet Society. Welcome to my home. I'd like to show you some of the violets that I grow, both standards and miniatures. Personally, I prefer the standards, the nice big ones. They bloom most of the time. This is a typical standard, and these are the miniatures and semi-miniatures. Violets have not only a lot of different colors, all except yellow, but they come with many different kinds and many different colors or shades of leaves and different shapes of leaves. This is a plain leaf. This is another plain leaf, but it is rather curly. This is a variegated leaf, probably one of the most variegated ones. It has pink as well as green. This is called a girl leaf. There are pointed leaves and round leaves. This is another variegation. You'll notice that the original leaves do not have the variegation that the center does. As the plant grows, it'll lose, or you'll take off these original leaves, and they'll all be like that. This is just a new plant, probably its first blooming. This is another one with pink variegation. A green and white one. And probably one of the most spectacular is called a Tommy Lou variegation. Then we have trailers. Trailers are different from the regular violets in that they have many crowns. The other ones we try to keep, I'm pruning them as I go, we try to keep them to one crown. But the trailers we allow to have quite a few crowns, at least 3 for a good show plant. Then before we go any farther, I should explain that most of the violets came from the first species plants from Africa, and this is the only one I happen to have. I don't collect those. This is called an Orbicularis, which is a species. There are 10 species plants, and all of the others came from those plants. They've been hybridized. These are miniatures and semi-miniatures. These are the ones with the plain leaves. These are the ones with the variegated leaves. This is a semi-miniature. The semi-miniatures just have a little larger leaves, and the plants grow about 2 inches larger, usually 6 to 8 inches, whereas the miniatures should stay under 6. This would be a miniature plant. Plants are not only hybridized, but occasionally we get a sport, and once in a while there'll be one that is so different that it can't be inherited. In that case, it can't be grown from a leaf, which is the way most of us grow our plants. This plant can only be, new plants like this can only be grown by taking the center out of the plant and forcing it to sucker. All of these plants can be grown from suckers, which are new little growth that comes on the stem. So to get many plants like this, I would have to take the center out and then remove those suckers. This is another example of a chimera. And this is a semi-miniature chimera. They also come in miniatures. You'll notice that in any case, all of the chimeras, whether they're standard, miniature, or semi-miniature, are pinwheel stripes. This plant is called Kiwi Dazzler. It's probably the most desirable of the chimeras. Everybody seems to like it because of its bright red and white blossoms. I suspect that it was grown from it sported originally from one with a all red blossom or one with just a little red edge on it. And as a result of an accident in nature, one came like this. Blossoms come in various types too. This is a single blossom with the typical 5 petals, and it has 2 colors. And this one is a single blossom with just 1 color. Here we have a very double blossom in just 1 color. These blossoms are called semi-double. And you'll notice they have a darker color on the edge. These blossoms with 2 colors and many splashes on them are called fantasies. This is a semi-double miniature with more than 1 color. When we have shows, we have a lot of different classifications according to leaf colors and double, single, varicolored, all these different kinds of blossoms that I've been telling you about. This is another fantasy blossom on a semi-miniature. The only other one I haven't mentioned is the one with the white edge. It has its own classification too. Now we're in the basement where all the work occurs. I want to show you how I pot the plants, how I grow them from a leaf, how I take off suckers, and maybe answer some of the questions that you have. The most important thing, I think, in growing violets successfully is to have good light. I use fluorescent tubes, 1 warm white and 1 cool white, and I leave them on for 11 to 12 hours a night. The other thing is to not overwater them. They need to be kept moist all the time, but not to be overwatered. Overwatering kills more plants than anything. The other important thing is to have a very porous soil, loose soil. That's so that the roots will have a chance to spread out. I use vermiculite, perlite, and peat moss. And because I have a lot of plants, I also pasteurize the peat moss. Another important thing to remember is to have a regular fertilizing program. I use 3 or 4 different kinds of fertilizer so that some have more nitrogen than others, some will make more blossoms than others, some might make better root system. And by alternating them each week, overall they get a good program. I raise my plants on a waffle grid. This cloth goes over the grid and hangs down into the water and allows the plant to stay moist all the time. And I put fertilizer in the water at only half the strength that it says to on the package. That's because it's getting it all the time instead of once a week. Other people water from the top and fertilize once a week. All of my plants are wicked. I put a nylon, it's just nylon stocking, in the pot about ½ an inch above the bottom, and then fill it up with soil and let it hang out so far. And then I set it on a pad, which has to be nylon or something that won't rot because it stays wet all the time. I put that on a waffle grid in my tray. The waffle grid hangs down in the water and also acts as a wick. The wick sits on the wet waffle grid so that the plant gets water just as it needs it. Most plants start out from a leaf, so I'll show you what I do. Leave about an inch. This should be cut at an angle, which I didn't do. Leave about an inch of stem, and let's see, put it in vermiculite and perlite, which is quite loose and will allow the leaf to put its roots out into that soil and spread out into it. And then when the little babies come off of the leaf, you won't disturb the root system. I'll show you what one looks like. This plant, this leaf was put down the 28th of October and it is now the middle of March. It isn't quite ready to have all the babies taken off, but we're going to take one off anyway. See, there's a cluster of baby plants coming. I'll take the biggest one. I won't plant them all today. This is a very handy little gadget. It's a bodkin. Other things are probably just as successful, but that happens to be my favorite. We all have our favorites. Now you see what the vermiculite and perlite does? It allows those roots to hang together, or rather to be separated. To plant this little baby, you first put in the wick, which is nylon like I described. I add a little soil, drop the nylon down, and put the soil in around it and tamp it down just loosely, not tightly. Then you would label it, water it, and in about 3 months or 4 months it'll be ready to pot into the next size pot, at which time you'll take it out. This is a handy little gadget. Just loosen. If you'll squeeze the pot like so, it loosens it up from the sides of the pot, the soil up from the sides of the pot. Then it comes right out. I have a pot all ready. What I did was put the same size pot down in the new pot and fill soil in around it. Then remove that pot, and I have a hole just the size to drop this in. Fill in with a little more soil. And do a little grooming at the same time. Take off any suckers. or dead blossoms, or baby leaves. A baby leaf is an unusually small one that they usually have first. This one happens to have a sucker, so we'll take that off. Again with the bodkin. Or you can use a pencil, just push it off with a pencil. If you don't remove the suckers, you'll have another little plant. And before long, that little plant will make the original plant off to one side. And it won't be uniform any longer. There's a baby leaf that needs to come off. Press that off. See? Here's a plant that has quite a large sucker on it. Some people like to save those suckers. And sometimes you can do it, and sometimes you ruin the plant doing it. But I always give it a try. Maybe that's why I have too many plants. They usually grow on one of the baby leaves, or just above one of the baby leaves. So what I did was just shove this down against the stem and pull it away from the stem. There I have it. Now to save that, it does have one little tiny root there, I think, but they usually have no roots at all. So I start again with my nylon wick, and these are just little 1-inch medicine cups. I need the vermiculite and perlite again. Drop the wick down, fill it up with vermiculite and perlite. Then I water that good, because otherwise the little plant won't be able to go down in and fall over. Then I always prop them up with toothpicks. That allows the light to get to the center of the plant, which is quite necessary. There you are. In about 2 months, I can see through that pot and see that it has roots. And knowing that the roots will stick to the vermiculite and perlite and not disturb the plant when I repot it, I'll put it into a 2.5-inch pot. And then in 3 or 4 more months, it will go into a 4-inch pot. I'm speaking of standards now. Then the same procedure is true of the little fellows. This is a miniature. This is a miniature trailer. I put a leaf down. In October, this is the leaf. And now it has a lot of little plantlets. And that would come out of the pot the same way. I keep losing my bodkin. There it is. This is a good example of what happens as far as root systems are concerned with the vermiculite and perlite. There are lots of roots. Just put the bodkin in there, or your tool, whatever it is, and pull them apart. And they have a lot of vermiculite and perlite sticking to them. So that one is ready to plant. And there's several others. There are usually about 5 plants to a leaf. I won't demonstrate another one. You've seen how I do it. But most people are kind of afraid to pull these apart, so I wanted to show you that there's really nothing to be afraid of. They have plenty of roots if you leave them in there about 4 months. I get a lot of enjoyment out of this. There's always something to do. You don't have to decide what to do. It's there. I enjoy having people come to the house, and I love explaining how I do it and showing off my violets. And I think you'll enjoy it too.
Hi, I'm Franklin Hyry. I'm a member of the Mount Hood Gesnariads Society in Portland, Oregon. To make your own seeds, as I have done in the past, to hybridize or to produce seeds of the same variety is very simple. Syringias are a good example because the sexual organs are quite easy to see, and they're easy to get to because of the opening of the blossom. Here's a blossom of Syringia eumorpha, the white form, that just fell off of this calyx. I'm going to apply the pollen from this plant onto this one, which is Syringia Georgia Sunset. Here's a blossom that I left intact, but here I cut the front half of this blossom off in order to expose the stigma. That's the end of this long structure, which in its entirety is called the style. In order to show you where the pollen is, I'm going to rip this blossom apart. It's fading, it's dying anyway, so don't cry. Inside there's two little filament structures attached in the center. In the center is a white powdery substance, which is the pollen, and it just fell on the floor, on the tabletop. I take a toothpick. It's very important to use a clean toothpick for every pollinization, and transfer that pollen to the stigma of the plant that is going to produce the seeds. I'll pick some of it up here off the table. You can also just pick it up on your fingertip and then apply your fingertip to the stigma of the mother plant. It's a very easy process. Now what I've got to do is wait 4 weeks for these seeds to mature inside this ovary, and I'll have a pod of, maybe a couple of hundred seeds of a brand new hybrid. One way to tell if your seed is, if your cross was successful, if the blossom falls off a day or two after you transfer the pollen onto it, the stigma, that means it's very likely that your hybrid took. Like I said, 4 weeks usually for Syringia seeds to mature, and then you break the pollen open and go through the seed sowing process that you saw earlier. Right here I've got a mixture of vermiculite and perlite, half and half, and I'm just spooning that in. It's somewhat moist already to keep the dust down, so I don't have to breathe the dust. And also when I pour the water in to water the seedlings, I don't have to really put a lot of water in there, which might disturb the seedlings. Then on top of that, what I do is I sprinkle some very fine vermiculite. It's the perlite layer there has a number of crevices that the seeds could fall down into. This makes a nice even surface for sowing the seeds right on the surface. Gesnariad seeds need light to germinate, and so you don't want to cover the seeds after you sow them. You can just barely see those little specks inside the groove, the crease of this piece of paper, and that's the Gesnariad seeds, Syringia. And what I want to do to distribute these evenly over my seed area is gently tap the piece of paper so that they fall off. I can watch them falling off the crease at the end and move the piece of paper around the surface of that seeding material. And you want to distribute the seeds as far apart evenly within that material as possible. What I do after I sow the seeds in is I take the water. This is a very dilute fertilizer solution. It's diluted half again with water, and I just pour this along the edge on one corner of the soil medium so as not to disturb the whole top. And because of the capillary action of the water, the moisture will rise to the surface. I can watch the vermiculite kind of changing character as it expands and grabs the moisture. After 10 days or so, you should see tiny little specks of green on the surface of your sowing medium. Now these were not distributed very evenly, so I've got a clump here and there, and sometimes they're a bit tricky to separate when they're so heavily populated. Now you've seen a succession of seeds from propagating to germination, from germination, to community tray, to individual pot, to blooming size. This particular Syningia is one hybrid that I created. The parents were Doll Baby was the seed parent, and the pollen parent was Purple Crest.